Hello, everybody. Welcome back again to the third panel for today. It's always gives me great pleasure to hand over to Alison Gow, friend and colleague here at the Journalism Innovation Leadership Program. But what some of you may not know is that Alison not only is a senior executive, or has been a senior executive at what is, I think, the largest media company in the UK, a news media company that is, but is also serves on a range of boards that gives her a really unique perspective in terms of the questions that we are going to be talking about today, the value of values in this world of great uncertainty. Alison sits on the board of, I'm going to mention first, as a founding member of the Journalism Innovation and Leadership Association Board of Industry Advisors and Mentors, of course, but also on the Public Interest News Foundation's board. She also sits on the board of IPSO, the Independent Press Standards Organization, which is the independent regulator, and it has a position on the board of the Journalist Charity with James. And so, Alison, thank you for taking the chair, and I'll let you introduce your panel and take it away.
Thank you very much, Francois, and thanks for introducing me, because frankly, I never know what to say about myself, so I appreciate that. Yeah, so we are talking today about the value of values. It's not my title, but I really love it, actually. I think it is something that maybe gets a bit lost in the general cut and thrust of newsrooms and newsroom discourse. And I've got a fantastic panel who are going to join me to talk about, among other things, media ethics, organizational values, and how DEI fits into that landscape. So James is, as many of you will know, a former BBC radio and TV journalist who's been chief executive of the Journalist Charity for, I think, coming up 7 years now, James. The JC, of which I'm very proud to be a board member, was started by Charles Dickens in 1864. And since then, it's helped journalists across the UK and Ireland with advice, support, and very practical financial assistance. It's currently running a campaign you may have seen started late last year, highlighting the importance of journalism in holding power to account. And it's called Life Without Journalism. It's very thought-provoking, and I can recommend it. So Chloé, moving on, is development manager of the Journalism Trust Initiative, which is an incredible initiative developed by 130 international experts. I'm mostly astonished that they all managed to come together at the same time to discuss this sort of thing. And it sets an industry standard to promote trustworthy journalism and compliance with kind of professional norms and behaviours that you would expect to see. There are currently, I think, Chloé, more than 1,700 media companies and providers in over 100 countries involved in the JTI at present, and I'm sure that number may have changed since I last got my involved in research on it. And then Lynda Moyo, who's head of emerging content at the Mirror, and actually joined the Mirror in 2023 as that role, but previously to that, Lynda and I worked together, and she spent 9 years heading up the What's On content across Reach's regional titles, although the national did get in very frequently to take her advice. She helps the Mirror explore new areas of content to engage meaningfully with new communities of readers. And alongside that, she was also a founding co-chair of Reach PLC's Culture Inclusion Network, which is a staff network that also went on to spawn a number of others at the same time. So let's talk about values. We have been seeing what disruptive innovation can do from uncomfortably close quarters for some significant time now as journalists. We've seen platform pivots, we've seen cultural changes, we've seen legislation changes that have all had impact on the business of news gathering and how we distribute and reach audiences. Alongside that, we've never seen the press more in the public eye for its behaviours, whether that's celebrity court cases, looking at illegal activities, frankly, of journalists and news organisations, or political scrutiny and the deliberate denigration of the motives and trustworthiness of the media in some cases. Every year we see new studies showing how public trust in the news industry is falling. The UK is particularly affected by this, but more or less an international issue. I think some of Scandinavia escapes. And we've had tensions over content, the quality versus quantity debate, how we protect public interest news, which is something really close to my heart in my pimp role, and the blurring of who is a journalist and what is journalism. I'm barely scratching the surface here, to be fair. But I'm happy to say that my panel has brought shovels and we're going to dig into it now. I would also like to draw everybody's attention to, at the top of your Teams box, there's a Q&A box next to the chat bubble. I'll keep an eye on that. I've got questions to ask everybody, but I'd really like to hear from the people who are in the audience on this as well and get your views, your questions, your opinions on the topics. So with that in mind, I'm going to kick off and I'm going to ask the question to everybody, which is going to be, how worried should we be about the studies that show falling audience trust in news? Big question. I'm going to start with you, James, because I think that the Life Without Journalism campaign really touches on this. And then Lynda, I'll come to you. And finally, Chloé, I'd really like to hear from you on what you think we can do about the problems that the others have mentioned. So, James.
Thanks, Alison. It's not a particularly positive answer because I think we should be very, very worried. And if you think about some of the biggest problems facing society, in my view, this is the biggest. Because if we look at climate change, political instability, some of the socio-economic issues that are pushing migration, these are all big individual issues that can affect communities, countries, the entire globe. But I think journalism and the media has that unifying ability to impact, bring together, with an unstable media, with an unstable journalistic industry, the potential for all those issues to be much, much worse is immediately increased. And I think we see this play out with climate change and the recent US election. That's one perfect example. I don't think people realise actually in or certainly outside the media just how damaging the weakening of trust in journalism is to society. I mean, it's so incredibly destabilising. And you mentioned we're going to come on to what we can do about it, but I don't think we should be too polite about voicing these concerns, because I think we have been a little bit too polite, or perhaps not been as vocal for long enough, certainly with key political figures about what's happening. It certainly feels to me like there was perhaps a bit of a deal with the devil done in the last few years, where we sort of accepted a status quo of greater influence by social digital media that is unregulated, and we now are where we are in a very sort of dangerous and murky world. So yeah, sorry, it's not particularly optimistic answer. I think there's a solution, but I think the first thing that we absolutely have to do as an industry and as a society sort of globally is come to terms with the fact that it's very, very dangerous.
Thanks, James. Lynda, what are your thoughts on this? Particularly impact your role, I suppose.
Hi, thanks, Alison, and hi, everyone. I mean, really, I just completely agree with everything that James has said, and I wish that I didn't, and I could bring some positivity to it. But for me, it's a huge issue because even though there is falling audience trust in the media, what we do know is that people do still want to know what's going on in the world. So it's more a case of, well, where are they getting this information from? And why should they trust those sources? So, you know, we talk about social media or influencers or whatever. And the worry really is that, well, they're not necessarily any more reliable or free from bias either. So there's a lot of focus on media audiences losing trust, and actually less on the fact that we need to approach all sources with a very critical eye, because the consequence, you know, as we know, is misinformation, disinformation, and meanwhile, on our side of it, people, for audiences that aren't coming to us anymore, it makes it even harder to fund accurate, factually correct news, and it's sort of that vicious cycle, really. So I think we have to go back to our core values and the importance of different voices in newsrooms and among our audiences, which is something that I'll probably talk more about afterwards. But that, for me, is essential for ensuring that we are offering fully inclusive coverage that's accurate, balanced, and most important of all, trustworthy. Because when we're truly representative, it actually empowers our audiences. So that's where we need to get to. The question is, how do we get there? So I'll hand over to you, Chloé, to answer that.
No, thank you. I obviously agree with what you said, Lynda and James, but maybe regarding into the direction of a proposed solution, which doesn't solve everything, but just one piece of the landscape, would be the Journalism Trust Initiative, which is easy for me to talk about because I represent the project. But this solution is the goal is to have an international signal to be able to identify transparent newsroom that are doing a transparent job, which basically this is on an ISO type standard, and each newsroom has to answer to several criteria, 100 criteria on who you are and how you work. So that's the story short. And then this newsroom can be audited by an independent certifier, which is not Reporters Without Borders. This being said, the solution that is proposed now is that, yes, almost 2,000 newsrooms are involved across the world. And the job now is to make this signal available to the citizens. So that's the next chapter we'll have to do. And the end goal is to use the system that is provided into other industries, and particularly food and agriculture, such as the fair trade label or bioagriculture label, but to do this for information. So for this, there are several hypotheses, major campaigns, information towards the citizens, but not to say you should read this, but to make it as an option for the citizens that are interested, and to make it attractive to learn about the media and ensure that this option is open to them. So that's the next chapter we'll have to do. Of course, more newsrooms are involved in the project, the better this is for this entire program. The first step that has been made is obviously a very small step and into a bigger scheme, is that the media themselves make publications and explanations to their audience on how they work and give access to this transparency. One of the typical questions is about the management, who's managing the media, if these people have any parts into political party, whatever company, or any political engagement. And that's just a small step on transparency, because if you're not transparent on who you are, who's behind, it's even more difficult for the citizens to trust whatever's been said. So that's the job we're doing now. The media certified themselves are doing the first pass to explain to their audience who they are, how they work. But then that's another job that we are doing with the Grand Public campaign. Not only media literacy, I don't think that's sufficient, but like a bigger scheme as in other industries. So that gives me a little piece of hope, but that's a long work and intense work on all this.
That's really interesting, Chloé. Thank you. I'm going to keep the mic open with you at the moment because, well, for two reasons. One is there's been a question come in, which I think actually leads into what, if anybody in this room knows what the answer is to this one, you will, which is what do the levels of trust in media in democratic countries currently compare? How do they compare to trust in autocratic companies? I think the digital news report that's just come out probably gives some insights into that as well. But from your experience, I don't know if you have countries that maybe fall into those two different camps, and whether you've got an answer for Paul on that. Chloé.
Yeah, if I may share example, of course, for there are some countries where the media that we in touch just can't work. So that I will talk more about the media side that are, so we're working. It's a side topic, but we're working with media in exile from these countries to ensure that this transparency can ensure them philanthropic funding and international support. So that they can do their job and continue to touch the citizens that can have access to it. So, but regarding the deployment into transparency and the importance of transparency in the newsroom, the initiative that we are coordinating is in 110 countries. So of course we have very, very different countries, and the newsroom are interested into the transparency aspects for different reasons. But I think the global move we see since a year and a half is that the importance of being transparent, which was not the case at the very beginning when all this has started, like 4 years ago. We received lots of comments like, we know what we're doing and we're doing great, so people are aware. And eventually that's not the case anymore. So now I feel like the need for the newsroom to be more transparent is more felt and more conscious. And so we see the dynamism of the media that are willing to join this transparency effort. And some are doing specific exercise or TV shows on to explain how they work. So I think that's something shared internationally.
That's great. Thank you for taking that one off the cuff. Lynda, I wanted to, I guess this is going to stay with the theme of transparency, really, but your entire role and focus is around bringing new voices and diversity of content into your news organisation, specifically the Mirror. How are you going about this, and how long does it take to start seeing the difference?
Well, I mean, first of all, how long has the problem been there? Well, since the beginning of journalism. So it's, there's no quick overall fix for this, but rather, I think, incremental steps to change culture that's actually at the root of it. So to be honest, the amount of time I've heard, just hire more diverse staff as the answer to this problem, when actually it's far deeper than that. Real diversity and inclusion, both in terms of having new voices in the newsrooms and through our content, it really requires deep structural changes within news organisations and a shift in the thinking around our editorial priorities, a shift in the newsroom culture, which now obviously includes a lot of people working from home as well, which is something else to factor in. And hiring practices, the way that stories are framed, it's everything. And so for me, it's been about, as I said before, looking at core values and principles and trying to bring others with you on that thinking. And, I, over the years, you included, Alison, have worked with colleagues who do really care about this and want to do the good work. And it's something actually Francois spoke to us students about earlier, and that was wanting to do good but also wanting to do well, and that's part of the problem. So do you want to make all audiences feel included? Yes. Do you want to tell all types of stories? Of course, that's a given. But doing well is actually determined by the business model, and that's the challenge that we have. And I think that we're now in a time where any push to diversify newsrooms and bring through that content is actually overshadowed, unfortunately, by the need to do well. And basically, that's just the fight to keep newsrooms alive, full stop. But it shouldn't be one without the other. So really, it's how do we bring the two together? And for me, it's trying to bring across three things, really. The first is authenticity. Because I think audiences can spot a mile off when you don't have that. How many times do we see, even outside of journalism, but brands slapping a rainbow on during Pride Month, but yet doing nothing for that community for the other months of the year and never showing any signs of understanding or addressing the complexities of their experiences. what does that tell us? Well, it just comes across as opportunistic, tokenistic, and it alienates people further. The second thing is assumptions and laziness. So newsrooms might try to attract new audiences by, really focusing in on a particular cultural or social issue that they assume will resonate with a certain group. But we also know that there's a lack of diversity in newsrooms. And so then if you combine that without educating yourself, immersing yourself, or consulting or involving the audience in the process, you're therefore lacking that knowledge and authenticity that's required. So a good example of that, which I've come across a lot over the years, is when it's Eid or Ramadan, the coverage of that, I've seen a lot of like, what is Eid? And there's nothing wrong with that content in theory, as long as it's written in the knowledge that it's likely mainly for a non-Muslim audience. That's absolutely fine, as long as we're looking at all the other content that is for those who observe that particular holy month and festival. Because otherwise the content can feel disconnected from the reality of that particular group's experiences. And then that comes across as very shallow, and again leads to mistrust. Meanwhile, there's other publications out there, more niche publications, such as there's a publication for Muslim women called Amalia, that have thought much more deeply about their intended audience. So they put out content about flexible working during Ramadan, guides for employers how to get through Ramadan as a single parent. So it's really digging into the things, ordinary things that matter to specific groups. And the third thing to say, and the thing that I think could be changed in an instant, really, in mainstream media, if you get the buy-in, it's just the day-to-day, the diversity of thought process, working inclusive in all aspects of journalism. So feeling represented actually just comes from ordinary things. So if you're writing, for example, about the experiences of pregnancy and childbirth, do that, but do that knowing that race, age, socioeconomic factors, and lots of other things alter that experience. So do your homework. You have to show that you care enough about your audience as a whole, and then all the nuances and intersections. It doesn't always have to be presented as like a big set piece or separate piece of content for a very specific group. It doesn't have to be, but it does have to be inclusive. So it doesn't matter what area you're working in. It could be what the weather, sport, family, entertainment, business, politics. It's to work inclusively.
I love that. And I really love the Eid example, because how often do you see what is Christmas written as a piece of SEO content? Very rarely.
Very good point. It says a lot, doesn't it, about the makeup of our newsrooms? Yes.
So the forum that we're here today on is part of the Journalism Leadership and Innovation Programme, and I wanted to bring leadership into it because that's where the ethics and value of a newsroom is often set. So James, as a journalist, and now as the leader of a large charity, how do you build ethics and values into your leadership? You can imagine, the charity takes donations, etc. I guess you've had instances where you've had to make some choices over spending or receiving donations, over who you help, etc. How do you navigate the decision making around that and make sure that you're making kind of value calls and ethical decisions?
Oh, this is such a tough one, isn't it? And it's a tough question, I think, we feel as individuals, because we now have more information about so many choices in our lives. When you go to the shop and you're buying products, you're thinking about, is this product sourced responsibly? Has this animal been treated properly? How far has it come? So we as individuals, I think, have lots of really difficult choices to make, along with other sort of financial decisions in our lives. So I think the two things can go together. I owe a lot to the people that I learned from. So I feel really lucky that I came into journalism at a time where I could learn from some of the best people, former news editors and editors who, may have been from different schools. We call them old school, but they believed in journalism and they believed in doing things properly. And I think you know, if that's you, then you've got a sense of ethics and morals that are, you know, they run through you. And starting my career at the BBC, I think I was lucky because whatever your thoughts about the BBC or whatever criticisms there are of the BBC, undoubtedly it has a real focus on doing things ethically, with the right kind of moral compass, with fairness, and all the things you would expect from good journalism at its root. So, you know, I think I'm really, really lucky to have had all that experience, and that makes you who you are. I mean, you know, you don't often sort of choose, you learn and you adapt and you take in from different people and different colleagues. So I think I'm a product of the people that I've worked with, and I'm really, really grateful for those experiences. You know, I did make a conscious choice to work at the BBC because I wanted to be, you know, I wanted to work, I don't know, this might sound slightly trite, and you can do it outside the BBC, but I wanted to be responsible. I wanted to be fair. I wanted to be impartial. I wanted to be the best journalist that I could be. And so as I went into the commercial sector and I established new organizations myself, you know, I think there's a choice to make about how you develop those organizations. And I think as you touched on earlier, Lynda, it's, you know, especially in the commercial world, you have to make them work. You know, it's not, you're not spending millions of pounds of other people's money to have a nice time and, you know, make sure everybody's happy. You have to deliver. But I think you also mentioned authenticity. And if as a leader, you have a clear objective about what you want to deliver, and you can deliver it authentically through a clear set of values, then you can be authentic and fair and ethical and moralistic. But you can also deliver the product that you are, you know, are challenged to deliver. But I mean, specifically, there are some really difficult questions to wrestle with, and some of the organizations that we work with, it's not fair for me to name them, but you know, there are times when an organization might offer some funding, and if you're a charity, you know, the chances are you need funding. But that organization may well work at odds with journalism, or it may well have some controversy surrounding it, or there may be some question marks. And I'm not going to say anything more than that, but you can imagine who those organizations are. And there have been, I think, some sort of deals with the devil again in the last few years. So I think the answer is to always think about your objectives and your mission, and are you being true to them? But also there's the kind of person in the street test, which I think is very simple, but it answers most questions. So for the charity, if we were to ask maybe the person in the newsroom rather than the person in the street whether a decision or an action was fair or reasonable, if they said yes, then we go with it. So we asked that question out loud a lot in our decision-making process. And I think in that way you can stay true to who you are. But in this fast-changing world, to roll out the superlatives and the cliches, I think we're having to revisit those kind of frameworks and mechanisms more and more to make sure we're on the right path.
I think what you've said circles into what's been referenced before, which is that the more voices that are involved in the decision, whether they're internal or new communities, the more people who have some sort of input in the direction and shape of an organisation's values, the more true and upholdable they're likely to be. Chloé, can I talk to you about AI for a moment? I thought the other panel did it absolutely superbly, but I think I'd like to blunder my way into it. I would be really interested, especially following on from Claire's points in the last panel, to hear your views on the use of AI content generation in newsrooms. And how do you think it can meet the standards of the JTI, the Journalism Trust Institute, but also not alienate audiences in the way that was talked about?
I think there are several pieces of answer on this. Of course, the recommendation is the suggestion is to use this some label, not only the Journalism Trust Initiative, but some transparency exercise to be able to nourish this mechanism and then use the content that have been produced in a transparent manner. So I think that's the first thing. And then the second thing, maybe you heard about this, I'm not sure, it's called the Spinoza project, and that's something that has been launched in France, and it's a basically AI tool that will be that is open source, so will be open to everyone, I think, from the summer. And that was a pilot with about 300 press titles, where this AI tool was using content from the newsroom to the newsroom and not pushing it in the hands of private actors, let's say. So in order not to sell the contents to these actors, but to keep it into a journalistic community. So that worked quite well, and that's something that should be recommended to other organizations in other countries. For this, we worked with the federations of publishers in France in order to gather the editors together. So I think there's also another element that we can quote is the Paris Charter of AI, with 10 recommendations into the use of AI in the newsroom. I will just quote one, which is, I think, key, is of course the integration of the journalists into the construction of the mechanism for AI, and not just to use it as a side and include it in the newsroom on the as a mandatory tool, but to build together the tool that will be adapted to the needs. Of course, other recommendations such as like ensure the traceability and the origin of the content, thanks to the Journalism Trust Initiative, could be a way that other citizens. So the suggestion here is obviously not to forbid the use of AI, but just to make it in an ethics and constant manner, and if possible, have an open source tool in order not to do the selling of the data and the loss of the data, as this could have been done before with another tech wave that we've had a few years ago. So that would be my 2 cents on this AI and traceability topics.
Thank you. And I guess it's not so much of an issue now because we've been using AI for a bit of time, but when it started, knowing that a journalist in a newsroom, knowing what they were allowed to use and what they weren't allowed to use would have been kind of important. Lynda, at Reach, certainly when I was there, actually, the Mirror used a fantastic tool to monitor the number of female stories and photos that were appearing on the homepage. That was something that Alison Phillips pioneered. So I'd just be really interested to hear from you in your role now, when you're looking out at what others are doing. Where do you see diversity and inclusion doing well, and what would you like to steal and try out yourself?
Yeah, that's a really good example of that work at the Mirror, and actually that was before I was at the Mirror, but it's something that we were talking about recently as to how can we do that same process with other aspects of diversity. I'm actually a huge advocate for the usefulness of AI, but I think the sort of worry that I have of it when it comes to diverse audiences is that we're very much at the start of the journey in building trust. As I said before, journalism has existed for centuries, so therefore underrepresented audiences have been there all that time as well. And even though we started to talk a lot more openly about this issue in the last sort of 5 to 10 years, I would say, it's always been there and it's deeply embedded. So I think AI has its use and could be really, really useful in terms of the data and identifying opportunities that we're perhaps missing to help journalists really look outside of themselves. But I think anything more than that at this moment would be seen as us trying to cut corners, away from that real human interaction and the trust building that's needed. But certainly, yeah, those tools we can use to see, what we should be doing more of, less of, where our biases are, that's going to be hugely helpful.
Right. I know that we've only got 5 minutes left now, and I've got a ton of questions, but I'm going to throw them under the bus if I need to, just to make sure that everybody gets a chance to come back in with their final thoughts. I have got a question, Chloé, from Zoe in the chat, which says, with regards to your organisation, what's the incentive for the media, especially small newsrooms, to be a part of it? Now, there may be resources you want to point her to, but if you've got an answer, by all means, go for it.
Yeah, of course, we're trying to do our best to provide concrete incentive, but I would say the first incentive is to try to get back the trust from the audience by being transparent on what's on the necessary criteria. So that's a question we often have from the newsroom. What do I win by doing this exercise? Like just doing the job, like just being transparent to the audience and do what's necessary to at least do a step toward the audience and try to get back the confidence. So I don't think there would be a need for incentive. That's just a necessary step that we need to do towards the audience. Other than that, of course, we're trying to have concrete incentives because we know that resources are very limited, time and funding, and so there would need for concrete goals in order for decision makers to get involved into this exercise. The first one is algorithm indexation. The goal is to have, that's why the international scale of the initiative is so important, is that to be able to provide this signal to tech platforms so that they can push and favor trustworthy news sources, basically media news sources. That's why the initiative is quoted in the European legislation, in the European Media Freedom Act, and in Digital Services Act, in order for tech platforms to push these news sources, basically. So visibility thanks to the algorithm indexation. At the moment, we're working with Bing, the search engine of Microsoft. Of course, that's not represented most of the search research, but that's one step. The second goal we're doing is working with advertisers in order to drive advertising revenue to newsrooms that are showing respect to professional standards. So that's another key element. And finally, philanthropic funding for the newsroom that are having this fund that are facilitated to media that are doing this transparency exercise. So visibility funding via advertising or philanthropic donors. That's the concrete steps. But I would say transparency toward the audience is the key element. Thanks.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for doing that. I'm going to finish the panel with one rapid fire thing for everybody. James, I'm going to ask you, I think, to repeat yourself here, but we've got a lot of burgeoning young leaders on this call. Piece of advice to put value at the heart of their leadership. So I know you said authenticity, James. Anything else that you would advise somebody to do, and keep it as brief as you can?
Yeah, I think that you have to remember why you're doing what you're doing, and that in these challenging times, you will see and hear a lot of difficult stuff. As Lynda mentioned, you know, it's difficult at the moment. It's tough out there. And you're going to come across a lot of challenges and a lot of negativity internally and externally. But if you remember why you're doing this and how important it is, you'll keep motivated. And, you know, there are lots of things in life that get a bit of a knock and come back stronger. And I truly believe that journalism is one of those things. Yes, we need some input, better input from government, possibly better input from regulators at the moment. There's some questions that need answering, but fundamentally, journalism is absolutely essential to society. And this is a fight that is really, really worth fighting. And it might feel like you're fighting with one arm tied behind your back at some points, and it might feel really difficult, but that's just tough. You know, keep going, keep doing it, and remember that the reward is a free and fair society, which depends on what you do.
I don't think I can say anything more than that. That's fantastic. Thank you so much, James, Chloé, and Lynda. It's been a whistle-stop tour. I would have loved to have had you for another hour talking about this, but I really appreciate your time, and thank you to everybody who posted questions as well. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you. Thank you, Alison, and thank you to this fantastic panel. And as we bring the JILeaders Winter Forum 2025 to a close, I just want to thank everybody else who's contributed to make this happen today. We've obviously had our fantastic speakers and our our partners and sponsors, Chrysalis, Media Lab, Jordan, Tinkeroo, FT Strategies, Brightsides, Journalism, Charity, and Art XP. But we've also had an amazing behind-the-scenes team. Our program officer, Santni Santosh Kerr, and our content producer, Aisha Aziz. Fantastic, thank you. And of course, all of you for joining us from across the world, across the country, for this incredible discussion this afternoon. I think it's important for us, James was talking about the purpose, and this has come up quite a lot, but I think in these times of great uncertainty, I think we need to ask ourselves, what is journalism for? Yes, to inform people. Yes, we need freedom. Yes, we need democracies and vote. But why do we need those? At whatever your answer is, it is for individuals, communities, and societies and markets to flourish. And whatever else we need to flourish, we need peace. If your journalism, if our journalism is not leading to greater peace at home, peace in the minds of individuals, peace in communities, peace in countries, peace across our globe, we do not have the fundamental basis for anything else to happen. So I think it's really important, as we see in this call, we've got people on our program coming in from Jordan and from the front lines of real war. And Alexandra and others have been through elections right now, and recognizing that actually peace in our societies is not to be taken for granted wherever we are. So I hope that we remind ourselves that fundamentally that is what we should be contributing to for societies and for individuals. Thank you all so much. We would like to invite you to the next forum, and to also to link up on our website. The Media Innovation Studio and the JILeaders program is an open community that has a range of activities, and we really invite people in. Our next forum is on the 5th of June in spring, and it'll be a hybrid affair. It will be from our campus in Lancashire, in Preston. So if you're in the area, able to come, you'll find many of our participants there, but also you're most welcome to join us at the Media Factory in the Media Innovation Studio, but also to join us online from wherever you are. With that, then I'd just like to thank you all, wish you a fantastic rest of the afternoon and great peace. Thank you, everybody, and we hope to see you next time.